Hey guys, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. No game for Georgia on Saturday, but that doesn't mean that DawgNation Daily's taking a week off. As Kirby Smart said this week, it's a work week for the team, it's a work week for us, and today that means an update on UGA recruiting because we are on the verge of potentially seeing Georgia add a big name, the class of 2018, as four-star linebacker Adam Anderson let it be known that he's going to make his final college decision coming up on Thursday. I'll share some thoughts on that. We'll have Jeff Sintel later on as well, and a lot of fun in between as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a ton of momentum for Georgia as a football program right now. A lot of that is on the field. Dogs continue to win and win comfortably, moving into Florida in 2 weeks, and then who knows what after that. But the momentum for Georgia is not just on the field at the moment. It's also in recruiting as well. And every time recruiting comes up this time of year here on DawgNation Daily, I am reminded of it wasn't all that long ago that when we talked about recruiting here on this program, we talked about the lack of momentum. We talked about where the big names were going to be for this team. Where was the return to the top 10, return to the top 5? After all, the 2017 class was number 3 overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite team ranking, and for a long time the class of 2018 for Georgia just seemed like it was going to kind of languish far below that. A lot of recruits seemed to have the 8-5 season of 2016 on their mind, and it seemed like they were more interested in other schools than they were interested in Georgia. But how quickly things have changed here as of late. Obviously, the commitment of 5-star quarterback Justin Fields helps with that. But he is not the only big name that Georgia has added and is set to add here probably over the course of the next few weeks, certainly over the course of the next few months. In fact, a big name could be in the fold here for Georgia as soon as this week, as four-star linebacker Adam Anderson says that he's going to announce his college decision for the final time on Thursday. Now, in a couple of minutes, we'll have Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily. We'll talk about that with him and what Jeff thinks about Anderson. After all, that's a name that we've discussed for quite a bit here on DawgNation Daily. But before I bring on Jeff and before I do anything else on today's show, I want to share some of my own thoughts on Adam Anderson here as well. Because, it has been kind of a long, winding road for Anderson on the recruiting trail. This was a guy who was a UGA commit, but somewhere along the way, his UGA commitment to Anderson just didn't quite feel right, didn't quite feel the way that he wanted to feel. And for a while, it seemed like he might be flirting with Auburn for a little bit, among other schools. And at the time, we had Benjamin Wolk, who covers Auburn recruiting for SECCountry.com, who we had him here on DawgNation Daily. And he kind of talked about what Anderson was kind of going through with Auburn. And obviously, he ended up not committing to Auburn. But what Ben said about Anderson's relationship with Auburn back a few months ago here on DawgNation Daily kind of gave you an indication of the way that he was at one point kind of trending away from Georgia. Here's Ben Wolk from back in the spring.
They hosted him at the end of January. He has shown interest in Auburn, and Auburn obviously would like what Adam Anderson brings to the table. I don't think at this time that Georgia should really have too much to worry about with Adam. I mean, I think that it was sort of he wanted to do his due diligence, go see a school that was somewhat nearby. One of his high school teammates actually came up who was looking for an offer from Auburn as well, so they came up together. Obviously, Auburn will make a push for him. They've had some success recruiting players from the state of Georgia in the past. They'll probably continue to do that. But I don't think there's really any major concern at this time for Georgia. Georgia was the first school that really showed serious interest in Adam. It was one of the first schools that he ever really went and visited. And by all accounts, he seems firm to Georgia, but he's not ruling out the fact that other schools can maybe impress him going forward.
In fact, he did let another school impress him. He talked about high school teammates, Jamarcus Chapman, Jaquan Griffin. They end up becoming LSU commits for a while, and that caused Adam Anderson to decommit from Georgia, and he himself also became an LSU commit. Sam Spiegelman covers SEC recruiting, LSU recruiting specifically for SECCountry.com, and after the commitment of Anderson to LSU, which was really one of the stories of the summer here, we had Sam on DawgNation Daily, ask him about the state of that commitment for Anderson to LSU. And even after the commitment took place, there was some signs that it was starting to maybe waver a little bit. Here was Sam Spiegelman from a couple months ago here on our program.
I know that he's made some visits elsewhere, Georgia, Clemson, Alabama in recent months. I know that people in Georgia believe that a flip will eventually take place, and maybe that has something to do with Jamarcus Chapman leaving the class when LSU added 2 more defensive linemen earlier last month during camp. they believe that Georgia and Clemson are more in the mix because of the proximity to home. And, our colleague Jeff Santel wrote a great story about Adam and his relationship with his family last year when he committed to the Bulldogs. Now that Chapman is out, you have to wonder whether this trio from Rome, Georgia is going to stick, whether Griffin will join Chapman in Tennessee, whether Anderson opts to stay home to Georgia or to Clemson, maybe even Alabama.
In fact, during that time, the way that Sam Spiegelman describes that looming decision for Adam Anderson, he was so torn on that front that he didn't go to one of the biggest events of the recruiting year, and certainly one of the biggest of the summer. He didn't go to Oregon for the opening because apparently he didn't want to be asked about LSU or Georgia or Tennessee or Alabama or any of those other schools. Here's Sam again.
It almost feels like he's half committed at this time. Now, from an LSU standpoint, Adam Anderson and his teammate Jaquan Griffin are all saying the right things. They're still committed as it stands today. Adam Anderson was invited to the opening. He did not make the trip. And I think part of the reason why is because he knew that he would get overwhelmed with questions, and I feel like he's very undecided at the moment.
So that's Sam Spiegelman describing the situation with Anderson, and as I said, it was kind of a long and winding road for him on the recruiting trail. A one-time UGA commit, decommits from Georgia, commits to LSU, maybe starts to regret that decision, decommits again, and things got opened back up to where the point now is when Anderson makes his decision on Thursday, the thought is Georgia is the leader. And the other schools that you had been mentioned in the past, a program like LSU where he was also once committed, probably not in the fold here. Auburn, who Benjamin Wolk talked about, definitely not in the fold anymore. For a while, there was a brief flirtation with Tennessee, but that never really materialized. It's probably down to Georgia and Alabama for Adam Anderson's services. We'll ask Jeff Sintel when he joins us in a moment if indeed Georgia is the leader here and the expected choice for Anderson when he makes his decision. But if it is good news for Georgia, and I assume that it probably is, I think this impacts the Dogs really in three ways. First of all, and you saw some of the highlights, and one of the guys that's working with us today, Nate, is one of the guys that shot those highlights. I mean, you've seen Adam Anderson play. You'll tell me, this guy gets after the quarterback. Thumbs up from him. He had 2.5 sacks against Justin Fields in some of the highlights you were just watching, if you are watching us on Facebook Live today. And he would add to this Georgia pass rush, which has been very much improved in 2 years under Kirby Smart. But the way that you keep improving year after year is continue to bring in those big-name pass rushers, those big-time pass rushers, and Adam Anderson would be one of those. That's one of the reasons why this would be a big recruiting win for Georgia. It also enhances that momentum that I was discussing to start the show. For Georgia right now, it's on the field and it's in recruiting. It seems like every time you log on to the internet, go to DawgNation.com, there's some sort of positive story about how well Georgia's doing. Either winning games, climbing the polls, attracting recruits, and Anderson, if he selects the Dogs on Thursday, would be just another example of that and a great way to kind of enhance the likelihood that more recruits over the course of the next few weeks start to do the same thing. That's one of the reasons why Georgia fans are excited about the possibility of Anderson being a part of this 2018 class. But maybe the most important reason of all, though, that Adam Anderson would matter to Georgia, I say, for last year, because you were starting to see something take shape now that you didn't see as recently, really, as last year. 2015, you didn't see much of this, but it's starting to happen now with regularity in the recruiting cycle of 2018. All of a sudden, Georgia's going head-to-head for some of the same players that Alabama wants, and Georgia's winning those battles. Georgia's been a good recruiting program for a while. A lot of 4-star names, the occasional 5-star name. But for the most part, Georgia was settling for the group of player just below the threshold of who Alabama wanted to go after. If Alabama wanted to go head-to-head against Georgia for a player, Alabama was expected to win that battle. But you're not seeing that as much lately. It didn't happen last year for Walter Grant, who Alabama wanted but chose Georgia instead. D'Angelo Gibbs, Alabama wanted. He chose Georgia instead. You had that a couple times for the class of 2017. You're going to have that more, I believe, here for the class of 2018. And Georgia, as a program, starts to take that next step of saying there's nobody in the South who's going to out-recruit the Dogs. I'm not telling you it's a number 1 overall class here in 2018, but over the course of the next couple of years, you're going to see Georgia not taking a backseat to anyone on the recruiting trail. And Adam Anderson, just one of the names that could be at the start of all of that. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Thanks for being here with us today. Whether you're watching us on Facebook Live, as I said, we are on Facebook Live on video each and every day starting at 10 a.m. Glad to have you with us for that. We're also on the radio at noon. For those of you in the Classic City on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, thanks for checking us out on the radio if you're there in that area. And, of course, in podcast form. Pretty much anywhere podcasts are found. We'll post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com, iTunes, SoundCloud. Thanks for being here with us today on DawgNation Daily. And thanks for being a part of our Gator Hater Countdown as we're now just 11 days away from Georgia, Florida, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville. We believe that good Georgia fans are Gator haters first and foremost. We've been saying this for the last 50 weeks, and we're going to say it every day between now and the time this game kicks off next Saturday. And one of the things we invited you to do yesterday, if you're like me and you hate the Gators, and if you're like me and you're ready for this game to take place 2 weeks from now, we kind of invited you to be a part of our Gator Hater roll call, because many of you feel just as strongly about this rivalry as I do, and we wanted to give you a chance to kind of show that. So some of you reached out to me on social media. We're going to do this again tomorrow, so hit me up at DawgNation Daily. You can be a part of this, like Eric and Kelsey Traylor. Now, if you're watching us on video, you can see this. If it's audio, you won't be able to see this, but we'll shout out anyway to Eric and Kelsey Traylor, who give us a cool meme of Georgia looking like Freddy Krueger saying, "Sleep well, Florida," because the dogs are coming after them. I like that one. We got a few more we'll show you here. A few more of the memes we'll take a look at here. Love this Gator Hater T-shirt coming in here. Thank you to Mr. Pitts for bringing that in. The Gator Hater T-shirt. Mike Brown, who's a bit of an, an artist, I guess. He's kind of drawing some great stuff, like this Florida Gator being kind of barbecued on the, is that called a spit? When they hang on that, is that called a spit? Those sticks that you put over a fire? You see Harry Dog there putting the Gator on the fire. I like that. Mike Brown, thanks for sending that in. Joseph Daniel, he didn't give us a picture. He gave us a stat. How about this? He retweets a guy named Bill Sykes, who says that Florida's only got 4 touchdown passes so far this year. 2 of those were from the Kentucky game when the receivers were uncovered. The other was from a Hail Mary game. So that's a nice stat to kind of get you excited about the Florida game and the misery they've had on offense. And how about this from Matthew Stubbs? Love this picture, looking back to a full decade ago now from the 2007 game when Georgia beat Florida. That was the celebration game for Mark Richt, and the real... one of the nice memories of a real special season for Georgia. Finished number 2 in the polls that year after getting hot in the late parts of October and November. Matthew Stubbs was at that game. Nice picture of the scoreboard there at the end of the game there. So that's our Gator Hater roll call. We'll do that for you every day here on DawgNation Daily leading up to next Saturday. And if you've got a picture of yourself in the Gator Hater T-shirt or anything that you've got that shows how much you hate Florida, send that to me at DawgNation Daily, and we'll look forward to talking to you about that all week long here on DawgNation Daily. All in advance of our big DawgNation invasion to Jacksonville coming up next Saturday. We're going to be there for a big tailgate. We told you about this a little bit yesterday. We're going to be in the touchdown lot. It's the Tailgaters Parking touchdown lot. It's near Gate 6 off Bryan Street. We're going to start at 10 a.m. that day. We're going to have a Dixie Vodka tasting bar for those 21 and up, of course. We're going to have 4 televisions. Jeff Sintel and I are going to be there. We'll watch all the early games with Young College Football. And we've got a brand new design for our Gator Hater T-shirt. It's red, and we're going to be giving them away absolutely free at our DawgNation Invasion tailgate while supplies last. So make sure you come on by and see us. Of course, all this made possible by our sponsors, including our friends at Dixie Vodka. As I said, we'll have the Dixie Vodka tasting area there set up at our DawgNation Invasion. And Dixie Vodka, if you haven't had it before, you're going to love it because it is the South's best tasting vodka. And it's really fun to be with Dixie Vodka for our DawgNation Invasion to Jacksonville coming up really now in just a little less than 2 weeks. All right, that's enough of that, at least for the moment. We'll talk more about Georgia, Florida in the days ahead. For now, though, I want to go back and look here at the game against Missouri from this past week for a moment, because I thought there was something that Kirby Smart said in his post-game press conference that's really pretty interesting. He was asked a point-blank question of, hey, the offense was more balanced here in this game. There were more passing plays than there had been in the games past. Georgia had been running it a lot more, chose to pass it a little more on Saturday. Was that something that was by design? Did you go into the game hoping to be more balanced? Or was that something that just sort of took shape because of the way the game was playing out? And here's the answer that Kirby Smart gave to that.
I think there's always intent. You want to be balanced, right? So the intent is to be balanced. To be balanced, you got to run and throw it. And we've had some games where we didn't have to do that. We've worked really hard on it in practices to get better at it. But I thought the kid did convert some third downs and make some good throws. And, they lifted us up because there's 2 times we took big-time shots that the offense picked up the defense and showed some grit.
Yeah, listen, first of all, that's that word there at the end that we talked about yesterday, show the idea of grit, the idea of sort of pushing back when pushed upon, punching back when punched. Missouri took a couple haymakers to Georgia on Saturday, and the Georgia offense did kind of punch back and come back at Missouri, showing that grit that Kirby Smart describes there. But I also like the notion of a Georgia team that goes into every game thinking, yeah, we'd like to be balanced. And for Georgia, for the most part this season, they haven't had to worry about being too balanced because the lead was big enough that the running game was really all that you needed. But as we said last week on the show, we know at a certain point in time, Georgia's either going to be facing a deficit or facing a very close game. And at that point, the passing game was going to be called upon to do more. And I believe on Saturday, Georgia proved that it's capable of doing more, and Jake Fromm in particular is capable of doing more if the passing game truly is called upon. Now, I know the Missouri defense is not very good, but Jake Fromm showed you on Saturday as the season progresses, he's getting better, more confident, more experienced, and becoming a much more dangerous quarterback for opposing defenses to face the rest of the season. DawgNation Daily today is brought to you in part by our friends at Georgia United Credit Union and their all-new Unified Checking Account, which gives you all the comforts of a free checking account and the options to earn more. It's a simple, convenient, rewarding checking account that fits your lifestyle. Visit GUCU.org for the terms and conditions that apply to this account, federally insured by NCUA. Great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily. Hope you enjoy Jeff Sintel right now. And we'll get Jeff Sintel coming up here in just a moment. In between now and then, I will tell you we'll have plenty more of your comments coming up a little later on. We'll try to squeeze in one or two of those comments right now as we wait for Jeff to kind of get with us on the program today. Of course, I am looking forward to talking to him about Adam Anderson and the potential impact that Anderson could make on the Georgia 2018 recruiting class. That's going to be a fun conversation to have, and we'll sort of dive in, see what some of y'all are saying about that. Philip Jordan Wells said, y'all might as well get a Savage t-shirt like Kirby had on SEC Live on Saturday. Yeah, I did like those Savage t-shirts. They also said Junkyard Dogs on them as well. And I don't know if y'all saw. I don't watch SEC Nation every week. I did try to watch a little bit of it because it was at Georgia on Saturday, and I guess he gave one to every person there at the broadcast table, the broadcast desk, but he gave Tim Tebow a small. That's kind of a clever thing for Kirby Smart to do. I like that. All right, we'll do a lot more of your comments later on. Darian C. Daniel asking about where the tailgate's going to be. So if you look online, you can see Tailgaters Parking. That's the name of the group that owns the lots. It's the touchdown lot for Tailgaters Parking. It's near Gate 6 of that lot, right off Bryan Street. That's where we're going to be. So we'll try to make sure you're able to know that and understand all of that in the days ahead. But for now, let's get ready for Jeff Sintel. And as I said, thanks for being with us in the program today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to warn you that I'm about to pepper you with about 95 or 96 questions. It is that kind of week here at DawgNation Daily. A lot of recruiting news, so I want to get through as much of it as we can. Let me just briefly, though, say good morning and welcome to our program. How you doing today?
Good morning, man. I guess I need to bite down on a power bar and chug a protein shake and get to work here, right?
Absolutely. We are going to put you through the ringer here over the course of the next couple of minutes. Let me start with a very simple, basic question. Adam Anderson's announcing on Thursday his commitment. Do you expect this to be good news for the Dogs?
I expect it to be news for the Dogs. I guess that's the best way to say that. I mean, nation's number 2 outside linebacker, probably going to be a 5-star when everybody re-racks him and sees him at the Army All-American game. He's about 6'4", about 220. If he ever gets into a big-time strength and conditioning program with the training table, he's going to look about 6'5" and about 255 and run like a gazelle. And he's going to have he's going to pad a lot of sack totals at either Alabama or Georgia, that's for sure, in the coming years.
And, you know, we were talking before you joined us. We have those highlights that we show from time to time of him, you know, at Rome when he was getting after Justin Fields earlier in the season. You talk about padding sack totals. I mean, both these programs, Alabama and Georgia, obviously want to improve their pass rush. That's true for all college football teams, but for Georgia in particular, it's looking for replacements for Carter and Bellamy. And, I mean, Anderson, man, he fits that role. He looks like exactly the prototype that you'd want to see. I think he's – I know that most people are going to say that Fields and Jamari Sawyer are the 2 biggest potential names for Georgia, one of those already in the fold. I don't think Adam Anderson, for me, is that far down the list, though, Jeff.
Wow, Brandon. How about, is he below? You probably slide Zamir down that ahead of Adam Anderson, don't you? Maybe.
The problem with Zamir White is he's been in the fold for such a long time now. You almost take him for granted. It's those guys you don't have that kind of become the more, I guess, attractive names because they're the ones that you don't already have possession of in the class. But I mean, there is something that what Anderson brings to the table that sort of separates good teams from championship teams. I'll say that much.
No doubt, but Brandon, I know you, sir. I mean, give him about 2 weeks of committed to the G, 2 months of committed to the G, and you'll be taking him for granted and thinking about KJ Henry.
I was about to say the same name. You're exactly right, Jeff. That's the way that kind of works out. And it's not just true for the 2018 class. It's true for 2019 as well, because then you'll start thinking about Owen Popo, the young man from Grayson High School. And, that part of the state is a really important thing for me. I want to see Georgia do better there. Pulling Popo would be an example of doing that. And there was a very interesting word used by you in the conversation that you, or I guess it was used by Popo originally, but it sort of showed up in your piece at DawgNation.com that his recruitment here has accelerated as of late. I'm going to assume here that accelerated is a carefully chosen word, because it certainly seems like there's a lot of momentum building all of a sudden with Popo in Georgia in a way that if you go back even a couple of months ago, you probably just didn't see.
Yeah, you can definitely sense that, especially how he seems like he's got a pretty good idea about what he wants to do. He has a clear finish line in mind, and I'm going to just tell you what these eyes see, man. When you see him on the Georgia sideline, you see him around guys like Nolan Smith, Justin Fields, Jaden Hazelwood. You see him around those guys, including Rashad Cheney Jr. Those are most of the 29 commits, and then the signature 2018 commit at this time. You see him looking very chummy. You see him looking like he belongs, and he's a guy that Georgia has definitely prioritized. And I can tell you, with what's coming down the pipe in today's intel, with a little bit of interest about Wanye Morris, the FSU commitment out of 2019 at Grayson, I think maybe Brandon might start maybe possibly thinking that Grayson high school is not where Georgia's four-star recruiting interest goes to die anymore.
Yeah, that certainly sounds that way. And you mentioned another name that I think is so pivotal in the Owen Popo recruitment right now, and that's Nolan Smith. And, Jeff, it seems like a different era of UGA football that we were talking about Nolan Smith flirting with Ohio State or Clemson or Alabama. I mean, that seems like the Tim Worley, Rodney Hampton era. That seems like the Eric Zier era. That seems like something from like a bygone past that Georgia fans had reason to worry about Nolan Smith's true commitment to Georgia, because as of late, he seems to be the biggest Dog fan there is, one of the anchors of that 2019 class, and a guy that's really doing some work on other very important prospects himself. I mean, this situation with Nolan Smith, this storyline with Nolan Smith, has changed, the best I can tell, drastically here over the course of the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, man, it sounds like some sort of Taylor Swift song about a teenage love story or something like that. I mean, sounds like he had the Clemson phase of his high school recruitment. Looks like that's kind of now in the rear view, because I think I saw Nolan do everything but put up his cell phone light at the Georgia game last week and participate in Krypton Fanfare. He may have, but I saw him shaking the red shaker. Brett, I don't even know if you shake the red shakers at Georgia games or anything like that. Definitely recruiting. He was kind of a little bit of a mix between Money Mayweather and Don King and Muhammad Ali. He would just go walk up to guys, for example, a guy like Rylan Goody, and just basically lay it out on the table about pointing at guys and saying, you want to be with us or you want to play against this? And he's a guy that's very persuasive. Very good communicator, very intelligent young man, and he also just happens to be the number 6 player in the country for the class of 2019, and he's one of 3 5-stars Georgia has committed in that class already.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And another guy, I guess, that was visiting Georgia on Saturday, Robert Cooper, the defensive tackle from South Gwinnett, currently a Florida State commit. But man, Georgia's trying to do what it can do here. And I guess the thing I'm most curious about when you kind of look ahead for the next few weeks for Cooper, who's the bigger threat to Georgia? Is it the school that he's currently committed to, Florida State, or is it a school trying to close some distance here late like Alabama? Who should Georgia be more worried about for Cooper? The school that he's got the verbal with, or the school that's chasing him, the Crimson Tide?
That's a tough question. Because I think he's going to make all these visits as a Florida State commit. They're the leader in the clubhouse. But, sooner or later that young man will probably just look at needs and depth and everything else. And, Florida State signed 3 defensive tackles last year that were pretty good, especially the nation's number 1 defensive tackle. They also signed the nation's number 10 defensive tackle. I spoke to him after the Missouri route, and he said that Georgia looks explosive on offense. They look stout and dominant on defense, and he really had a good visit. I expect him to return. And I think Georgia will get the last visit there somehow because he plans to go to Florida State, Louisville, and then he plans to go to LSU, Alabama, and then Georgia, Kentucky might be his visit with a lot of chips on the line for Robert Cooper.
And so this is where you're going to accuse me of being greedy here, but I do have to wonder how Cooper impacts Trevor Trout, the other defensive tackle we talked about last week here on DawgNation Daily. I'm assuming that Georgia needs as many defensive tackles as it can get, and so it's going to go hard on both Cooper and Trout, but does one have any impact on the other here?
I don't think so. Everybody knows defensive tackle is kind of a whopper of a position, and you can never have too many defensive tackles. If you look at Georgia, I think maybe one of the reasons why that defense didn't have the bite that it usually does is Georgia only rotated about 3 or 4 elite defensive tackles against the Tigers when you have guys like David Marshall on the line and Trenton Thompson on the line and DeQuan Hawkins-Muckle. They didn't have their they didn't have all the rounds in the chamber, I guess, that had defensive tackle to kind of attack offenses with. And I think the more the merrier there. Georgia has Devontae Wyatt supposedly going to come back when he qualifies from the junior college ranks. They have a commitment from Tremel Walthour from Liberty County, but you also have to remember that the Bulldogs, they didn't sign any defensive tackles last year at all, and really just one defensive lineman at all in totality, and that was Malik Herring, who got some early reps and looked pretty good against Missouri.
Yeah, that's very true. Let me talk about the other side of the ball for a moment. That's Daniel Falalele. I hope I pronounced that right. I'll probably butcher that every single time. He takes an official visit to Georgia. And, Jeff, I'll admit, for the most part, my attention is generally focused on the 4- and 5-star names. That's normally who I ask you about. But because of Falalele's size, I think that he's a very interesting 3-star prospect. And if this was 2017, I don't know that I'd be on him as much for Georgia because I thought Georgia needed guys that could come in and play right away. Georgia doesn't need as much of those anymore because it's loading up at the offensive line position. Georgia's in a position, I believe, right now where it could bring a guy like this in, let him take some time, use Sam Pittman as a teacher, and develop him into a player. Is that kind of the same wavelength you're on here, that Georgia, because it's recruiting well at the offensive line position, can kind of put a feeler out there, Falalele, and see kind of where it goes from there?
Yeah, that's definitely a high-risk, high-reward type guy. Because if you look at it, Daniel Falalele, kind of think about ukulele at the end, Brandon. That may be the mnemonic that helps you with the phonetics there a little bit. But what you do there with him is you park him for 1 to 2 years. And why? Because he's from Australia. He didn't know what the term quick slide or kick step or pass set or first down meant this time about 2 years ago. This is his first varsity football action at all, but he's about 6'8.5". He's about 385, 390. He can dunk a basketball. Everybody says he doesn't have the feet yet, that he's not much more than a glorified bookcase, which is huge for their offensive tackle position, but I disagree with that. I just don't think anybody knows yet what Daniel can be until he's had about 2 years of in the grind football training. He's just a massive human being, and nobody's going to ever probably think of him as a left tackle. I think that would be an upset if he ever became a left tackle. But what he can be on the SEC level is a big-time right tackle. That's the run side, and I guess if Georgia would ever be running that way and they would have guys like maybe Notori Johnson, Justin Schaefer, Solomon Kinley paired on that side, or maybe even a Trey Hill, or you have him paired on that side with an Isaiah Wilson or a Daniel Falalele, you're going to have a lot. You're going to be running downhill definitely between those guys. And for everyone that wonders about this young man and whether he's a project or whether he fits in, Georgia kind of has a guy like that already in Owen Condon, who's a 3-star committed at tackle for 2018. You also got to look at a guy like DeMarcus Hayes. Does he have a future in this program? Yeah. He's a junior college guy with 2 years of eligibility. Not hearing a lot of great things about DeMarcus. And, I kind of think Georgia is, like you said, stacking up a little bit with guys like Isaiah Wilson and, Ben Cleveland. Let's not forget that name, of guys that can come in and handle the tackle spot as well. And then they've got, the left side. I think the left tackle of the future, I think, is definitely Andrew Thomas. And you start putting all that together, and Georgia can't afford to take a shot to go really deep with a guy like this intriguing prospect from IMG. the last thing I'll say is Daniel goes against better pass rushers, Xavier Thomas, Nolan Smith, Stephon Wynn Jr., every day in practice than any other high school prospect in the country. And he's holding his own. He's getting better every week. And that type of stuff's going to make him better. And the reports I get back from IMG, from guys like Stephon Wynn and Nolan Smith, is the young man is coming along and making a lot of progress through his first 4 or 5 varsity starts of his career.
Right now, Tennessee's just hemorrhaging recruits because of the problems that Butch Jones is having. One of those guys they may be about to lose is Alante Taylor. Is Georgia recruiting Taylor as a wide receiver or as a defensive back, or are they not really specifying right now?
They're recruiting him as a wide receiver right now. Notre Dame's the only one that's really ratcheted in the interest there and say we see you as a cornerback. You know, Alante Taylor still, when I spoke to him late last week, he was wondering whether Georgia would get an official with the likes of Wake Forest, Louisville, and maybe Ohio State. He currently had Georgia and Ohio State vying for his 5th official visit. He also planned to give Tennessee an official visit, but he's the type of guy who told me he can only look at the cards that are on the table in front of him, and he plans to stay a Tennessee commitment as long as this current staff stays in place. I think wide receivers coach Kevin Beard is a big anchor for him with the Volunteers along with his home state school. But I think if something, let me just rephrase that. I think if the eventuality happens with Butch Jones in Tennessee, then I do think you're going to see his recruitment come wide open again.
I want to talk to you about another Tennessee commit in a moment to close out our conversation. Before that, let me squeeze in one more about a wide receiver, because this talk of Georgia kind of reaching out and being in the mix for other wide receivers makes me think about Josh Vann, who was thought to be close to Justin Fields, but Vann made his decision to go to South Carolina, or at least commit to South Carolina. Carolina had shown him a lot of love for a long time. I think they sort of think, and Vann sort of thinks, he can be kind of their premier wide receiver as opposed to just a slot receiver at Georgia. But does the presence of Fields at Georgia open things back up for Vann again at Georgia, or is he South Carolina all the way at this point?
Well, Brennan, I'd have a different answer to that question if Elijah Moore hadn't committed to Georgia. Elijah Moore was basically another All-American 4-star blue-chip receiver, and it was kind of the thing when Josh Vann was undecided. And even when Josh Vann was undecided with, Justin Fields knowing kind of where he was going to go, at least privately, a lot earlier than when he actually committed the first week of October. I think Josh Vann had a lot of time to sit there on the down low and recalculate his interest in Georgia, and for Georgia to recalculate its interest in him. And I think what Georgia got is they got that slot receiver that can make a lot of big plays, that is super fast, and they kind of checked that need off with Elijah Moore. And even Alante Taylor told me that Georgia only planned to take 2 receivers, but if they expanded if they were going to think about a third and stretch that quota for 2018 to a third, then he would be the guy. I don't think Georgia would add a third receiver unless it would be a huge name like a Justin Shorter, an Alante Taylor, or maybe even a guy like Jamar Chase, especially with the relationship there with Aaron Brule. But, kind of right there, I think Josh Vann is probably going to be happy to be a Gamecock. Gamecocks actually have a decent record in conference play, and they've made some strides under Will Muschamp. And I think if you had to ask me right now where Josh Vann ends up, I think he stays where he's at.
All right, last question for me, Jeff, and you're always so generous with your time. We appreciate that. But I guess Trey Dean was also in Athens on Saturday, and Dean, the safety from Dutchtown, has just really been, for me, a really weird recruitment. There was a time, if you want to go back to it was late spring, early summer, where when he does not take the visit to Texas that he was supposed to take, I think most people thought that meant he was definitely coming to Georgia. There was a flurry of online predictions for Dean to Georgia. But then you heard about South Carolina. That doesn't materialize. Out of nowhere, he sort of commits to Tennessee. And obviously, as I said a moment ago, a lot of the Tennessee commits rethinking things right now. Is Dean still in a relationship with Georgia? Is Georgia still recruiting Dean? Can you explain anything about the past here and kind of any kind of prediction about the future? Georgia obviously needs defensive backs. Is Dean one of the guys they're still targeting?
Well, that's a great question, Brandon. I think, I spoke with Israel Mukuamu, who was the official visitor of the Florida State commitment, the official visitor this past weekend to Georgia, and he tells me that Georgia plans to take 4 DBs this year. That's 2 safeties, and that would be 2 cornerbacks. As it looks right now, it looks like Georgia has 1 safety in Rashad Wildgoose and 1 cornerback in Chris Smith. So it looks like Georgia needs 2 more defensive backs, and obviously the smart fan is sitting there thinking, okay, well, all these DBs that were there, Trey Dean was an unofficial visitor. I think some outlets had him as an official visitor, but he was an unofficial visitor to Georgia on Saturday. He soaked it all up. He saw that Georgia definitely is in need of defensive backs, much like Mukuamu. And he told me we exchanged some messages briefly. He told me he had a good visit. Things went well. I think the perplexing thing for Trey Dean is I think his decision was all about where he could go and kind of command some early playing time. I think Tennessee was the spot for that. And I say this because of some conjecture here. Trey Dean told me that he felt he had committable offers from both Alabama and Georgia, and he chose to commit to Tennessee. Well, the only way I can kind of piece all that together from his point of view is that Georgia has guys like Richard LeCounte and D'Angelo Gibbs and Trey Bishop committed in 2017, and they will have a leg up on him and a year up on him. Alabama is stacked as usual when it comes to the safety position, not the cornerback position, but the safety position. So I just thought maybe he saw a lot more playing time in that orange and white checkerboard palace they call Knoxville. And I wonder if that's going to change when he sees what's happening with the staff there.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Jeff, and a great way to finish our conversation off for today. We appreciate your time here today on DawgNation Daily. Always love your recruiting insight, including the Centel Intel, each and every day at DawgNation.com. And, Jeff, I'll look forward to seeing you in person next Tuesday, a week from today, for our big event at Marlowe's, our DawgNation Invasion preview from the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. That's going to be a ton of fun, Jeff.
Hey, Brandon, who's Georgia play that week, man? Help me out there, man.
Yeah, that is the Florida Gators. That's the one we've all got circled, Jeff. You better believe that I'm trying to contain myself. These next 2 weeks for me are going to be misery because I want to play this game right now. I don't want to wait 2 weeks for this thing.
But I guess you want one of those 44-0 in 1982. Is that what you're seeing in your Georgia Bulldog dreams?
Obviously, I'd love to have that. All I want to do is get a victory and get ready to move on. I'll take one any way that I can get it, but obviously it'd be fun to see Georgia flex a little bit. There's no question about that. But listen, this is a long time coming for the Dogs. I'll take a win however I can get one.
You mean you'll take a 10-9 victory like days of yore? You'll take one of those, man, at least?
Maybe 26-22, something like that. I'll take anything you got for me.
Man, you see, my intel's wrong on that one, Brandon. I thought you were a 44-0 kind of Gator hater fan there, man.
Listen, this is one of those things where while I am anticipatory, I'm not going to be greedy.
All right, sir. Thanks, man, for the time. Have a day.
All right, you too, Jeff. Good to talk to you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, listen, I wanted to just hammer Jeff like 1,000 recruiting questions because this is one of those weeks where there's a lot going on. The Anderson thing on Thursday, whatever's about to happen with some of these other guys, you got a lot of stuff that could be breaking here the next few weeks, and I wanted Jeff to kind of lay the groundwork for that. I thought he did a good job of doing that. Before I do the SEC Through, let me also kind of piggyback off one more thing that Jeff said. The topic of Daniel Falalalele comes up. Did I do it right that time? Falalalele? The somewhat project offensive lineman from IMG Academy from Australia. Hasn't played a lot of organized football, but has all the size. I'm talking about like a giant of a man, 6'9", nearly 400 pounds. And I'd be okay with a project like that for this team right now because it's deep enough to roll the dice with someone like this. I mean, he could become an all-time great player because of his size, and you could allow him to take a couple years to kind of grow into that role. And another reason why I think Georgia fans could be optimistic about the possibility of bringing in a project and having him pan out, remember, it wasn't all that long ago that Solomon Kinley kind of looked himself like a project. Now, he wasn't probably as much of a project as Falalalele is right now, and he's also not yet an all-SEC offensive lineman. But he's pretty dadgum good, and Georgia's better with him than they would ever be without him. That's a guy that was not as highly rated coming out of high school as Ben Cleveland was for that class of 2016. But Kinley so far has been the better player, and I think you've got to give Sam Pittman, the offensive line coach, a lot of the credit for that. He has developed Kinley well, and other big project-style offensive linemen, I think that Pittman could do some similar work with it. I think that could be really interesting to see. I will tell you here as we do our SEC through that our DawgNation Invasion we've been telling you about coming up in Jacksonville a couple weeks, also brought to you in part by our friends at Kroger. And right now, Kroger's your Halloween hangout. They've got candy, decorations, everything you need to make your trick-or-treating fun. I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. You better believe they are super excited about Halloween, and we love Kroger for all of our Halloween needs. Time now for our SEC through. We'll talk a little SEC here. Hope you'll join us for AT&T SEC Country Live, 3 p.m. Eastern Time today on the SEC Country Facebook page. And one of the things we talked about yesterday was another one of these sort of classic lines from Butch Jones. I don't know if we have the quote we can show you on the screen here or not, but Jones is talking about the game against South Carolina, and he says that, hey, we did everything we could to win other than score touchdowns. And, I understand what he's trying to say, but for the life of me, I don't quite understand how Jones keeps stepping in the wrong direction when it comes to some of these lines. He almost immediately says something that can be used against him. And not because people have some sort of vendetta against him. He's not that hateable. He's frankly not interesting enough to be hateable. And people don't do this because he's hated. They do this, I think, because they're just perplexed by how it is that Butch Jones continues to say the wrong thing. He's like the world's worst motivational calendar writer, or I don't know what, but these horrible phrases just keep getting him in trouble. This is probably another example of that. And I think that for a game that may end up being the final nail in his coffin as Tennessee coach, this quote may be one of the things that helps push him out the door, quite possibly. Speaking of being pushed out the door, Houston Nutt at one point was pushed out the door by Ole Miss, but maybe Nutt gets the last laugh. As you know, in the countersuit that he filed, against Ole Miss for what he thought was defamation, he wasn't really asking for very much in the way of money. He just simply wanted his apology. Well, he got an apology from Ole Miss yesterday, and as many people have said online about this so far, imagine how much different things could have been for Ole Miss had they just apologized to him when he asked for it. Maybe Hugh Freeze would still be the coach with the Rebels, and maybe the program at Ole Miss would not quite be the laughingstock that it appears to be right now because of all the things that were unearthed because of the lawsuit that Houston Nutt originally filed. I guess Ole Miss had no other choice but to do this. But Houston Nutt here, after being what he called defamed because of the way that Ole Miss framed its NCAA allegations, all of a sudden Houston Nutt gets the last laugh here. Kind of an interesting situation. Speaking of Ole Miss, other interesting situation. Magnolia Bowl on Saturday as the Rebels take on LSU. And, boy, there's kind of an interesting war of words that's kind of come up out of nowhere on this one. You've got LSU coach Ed Orgeron who's asked about, any kind of weirdness about going back and playing Ole Miss again. He says, I'm paraphrasing the quote here, but he essentially says, no, there's no weirdness for me at all because the whole time I was at Ole Miss, I was wishing I was at LSU, which is kind of an applause line and sort of an empty thing for a coach to say, but you better believe it offended the people at Ole Miss, and I kind of get where they're coming from on this. I mean, I get the fact that you don't have the job of making Ole Miss fans happy anymore. It's your job to make LSU fans happy. I do get that, and I do understand that, but there's kind of a way to do things, and I think that Orgeron here probably unnecessarily turned up the temperature for this game against Ole Miss, which I think could be more dangerous for an LSU team that's won 2 straight big football games. I think Ole Miss on Saturday may be a little more dangerous than LSU gives it credit for, and I don't think that Orgeron's words there help at all. A couple other quick SEC stories I'll get to. So there's been a lot said about Jarrett Stidham, the Auburn quarterback, after another dismal performance for him against LSU. He has not been big in the biggest games that Auburn's played so far this season, and there's some talk and discussion about whether or not that Stidham's allowed to change plays in the line of scrimmage, the way that most quarterbacks would be able to. Apparently Chip Lindsey doesn't like that quite as much, and this is another example of Auburn's offense, Malzahn the head coach, Chip Lindsey the first-year offensive coordinator. Man, a bunch of tough questions being asked about that crew right now. And frankly, I'm not quite sure where all this is heading, but it does not look to be heading somewhere good for Auburn at the moment. This team right now is not as good as I thought it would be at this point during the season. I thought they'd show up and play better against LSU than they did, but that did not happen on Saturday. As far as the hot seat status, though, for McElwain goes and Malzahn, the Auburn coach, Andy Staples wrote about this at SI.com, and, I don't think we're there yet for Malzahn after the LSU game. And the other guy that got mentioned by Andy Staples, Jim McElwain, the Florida coach, I don't think we're there yet for either of those guys. But the one thing you're going to see at Florida in particular, especially coming off the loss to Texas A&M after having lost LSU the week before, is a program here that's got to try to figure something out. Now, the one thing that McElwain has going for him that Malzahn doesn't is that McElwain's got the future he can point to. He's got a 5-star quarterback in Matt Corral coming in for the class of 2018. But will that be enough to save McElwain? Will that be enough to kind of get him back in the good graces? As I said, Andy Staples wrote about this at SI.com this week, and that will be quite a storyline that will unfold here in the really over the course of the next couple of years. Malzahn and McElwain are both coaching at their respective schools, I think, next year, but 2018 becomes a big year for both of them, especially in the case of McElwain, who's really, I think, going to have to try to prove something. We'll make that your SEC through. All right. We'll let you hear from Kirby Smart here in just a moment. Kirby Smart talking about the only negative, I think, that came from Georgia's game against Missouri on Saturday. Kirby Smart addressed that. We'll let you hear that. But before that, I mentioned this with Jeff Sintel. We've got a big event taking place a week from today, and I'd love to have you be a part of it if you can. 6 to 8 p.m. at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. We're going to be there for our DawgNation Invasion Big Game preview. If you show up that day wearing your Georgia colors, red and black, Marlowe's going to give you a free appetizer to go along with your entree purchase. Jeff and I will be doing the off-air conversation like we've done in the past. We'll do a very special Facebook Live broadcast for those who can't be with us there at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. It's 6 to 8 p.m. It's our DawgNation Invasion Big Game preview. Hope you can be there with us. 3575 Durden Drive in Atlanta. That's the Brookhaven location for Marlowe's. We'll be there a week from today from 6 to 8 p.m. Hope you can be there with us for that. And as I said, on that night, we'll be talking a lot about Georgia. And one of the things we may look back on is exactly what Georgia was able to do in its last game before it played Florida. The final tune-up was Missouri, and for the most part, everything went well for the Dogs with the exception of a couple of big plays for the Missouri passing game. Did this expose a vulnerability to the Georgia defense, and is this a reason for Georgia fans to be concerned? Well, here's what Kirby Smart had to say about those big passing plays that the Dogs gave up.
I think there's always a little credit given to them and always a little blame given to us. I mean, at the end of the day, somebody's got responsibility, somebody's got coverage, and they got to do a good job. But give them credit. Their quarterback's got a big arm, and that kid's a fast receiver. If you take out 2 plays, you really don't play that bad a defense. It's 126 yards or something on 2 plays. That's almost half their offense. And we knew before the game, we said, don't give up big plays, and you got a chance. And we gave up two big plays. But you know what? We'll learn from that. We'll get better from that. And that defense needed a wake-up call. To go out and play better.
I think it's really interesting from Kirby Smart right there that he's a lot more casual about that than you would expect him to be. And you can say, well, the team won easily, so maybe that's why he's in kind of a good mood, lighthearted spirit about that. But even after wins, Kirby Smart's not always as casual as he was right there after a legitimate bad moment for his team, and really a couple of them in the first half. So why is Kirby Smart so willing to, I don't want to say excuse what happened, but at least not be all that panicked about what happened with the Georgia defense? I think it's true for 2 reasons. I think the one thing that you saw on Saturday is, even for a team like Missouri, capable of hitting some big passing plays, they still couldn't run the football. And listen, I don't care if you do hit the occasional big passing play. If you can't run the ball, you're not going to have much success in the SEC. And Georgia, while it is vulnerable in the secondary, is not yielding any rushing yards. Here's the other thing that I believe that Kirby Smart knows. Ultimately, the problems in his secondary won't be truly corrected until you see at least a couple more recruiting cycles here. Class of 2018, class of 2019. I think you're going to bring in some big-name defensive backs. And the stuff you saw on Saturday, that won't be happening in the years ahead. All right, so as we get ready to wrap up here, let me also remind you the DawgNation Daily is brought to you in part by our friends at MyBookie. Make sure you check them out online at mybookie.ag. They are the sportsbook known for the fast, no-hassle payout when you win, and right now they've also got a special offer for you. You can get your first deposit matched up to 100%, but you got to use the promo code DawgNation, spelled D-A-W-G, DawgNation, online, mybookie.ag. You can check them out, and they can match your first deposit up to 100%. Good luck. You play, you win, you get paid, and it is as simple as that with my friends at MyBookie. MyBookie.ag, promo code DawgNation. Thought Mark Schlabach had an interesting piece at ESPN.com. He ranked the conferences in college football not by how good they are, but by how interesting they are. I was a little surprised, though. The SEC comes in only at number 2 on his list. He had the Big Ten as the most interesting. When you look at Georgia on the rise, hot seat statuses for Malzahn, Butch Jones, Jim McElwain, SEC's pretty interesting right now. We'll talk about it tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily, and we'll see you then. And for those of you listening to us and watching us on video right now, we'll take some of your comments as well. Your chance to kind of get in and discuss some of what's going on here on DawgNation Daily, whether it be something from the beginning of the show about Adam Anderson or kind of really anything in between. The Missouri game, look ahead to Florida. We'll kind of do all that with y'all here. William Moore on the off week for Georgia says dogs need to rest and get whole. Yeah, that's probably a pretty good idea. Daniel Goldsmith says, here's a stat for you. In 7 games, we've only trailed 4 times, all 4 being to Notre Dame, and never by more than 7 points. And we scored the very next drive. Damn, that is a pretty interesting stat. Randy Hall says, this Thursday, let's welcome Adam Anderson into the Wolfpack. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously showing a lot of confidence. I understand where that confidence comes from. My guess is that Anderson will be a UGA commit after Thursday for the second time, and this time it's a commitment that's going to last, but certainly he will be welcomed in for sure if he does join the class. And, y'all, I got to tell y'all this. I hate to say this. That's not Herschel Walker. And I'm not. I mean, no one would love having Herschel Walker in the comment section more than me, but that's not Herschel Walker. That's not the Herschel Walker. It may be a Herschel Walker account, but that's not the Herschel Walker. Although number 34 is always welcome in here. Zach Brewer says, even with the 28 points, Georgia's defense still had Missouri to 158 yards under their season average. Yeah, so I mean that shows you the work that they're doing there. Shane Moody says Gators have only scored over 30 in one game this year. Dogs need to put the hammer down on them. Yeah, you know, the one thing that I think you got to be at least a little bit respectful of Florida about is they do have a pretty good defensive line. You know, you've got, I mentioned this yesterday during this portion of the show, like Antonius Clayton, who's a pretty big-time recruit. He hadn't even really been playing that much early in the year because they've got some depth along that front. I guess he's kind of coming along. As we said yesterday, Sherritt is injured, but you got Zuniga. You got a pretty deep group of defensive linemen. So, you know, Kirby Smart talks about keep chopping wood. You gotta try to run the football in the first half, and it's gonna be hard to do it early, but you gotta keep pounding it, hoping it gets easier over the course of 4 quarters. That's the one thing about Saturday's game that may give you a little bit of reason, or when 2 Saturdays from now when Georgia plays this game. That's the one thing that may give you a little bit of pause is that it may be a little tough sledding for Georgia against that Florida defensive line early in the game. Now, will it wear down like the other defensive fronts have against Georgia? By the end of the game, I think it probably will. But this is not a team that I believe that Georgia is going to come out and just, whitewash from the word go. Ultimately, I don't think Florida's got the depth to stay with Georgia. And ultimately, the problems that people have mentioned, their inability to score, I don't think the secondary for the Gators is anywhere near as good as it's been in the past. Those kinds of things will kind of show up here. But I don't think that's going to necessarily be evident in the first quarter. It may be evident by the fourth quarter and then the third quarter, but probably not from the first quarter. Joseph Swearingen says, I see that Webb's working his way up the depth chart. I saw him getting some playing time at Vandy. Pretty impressive to be playing so quickly. Was Webb playing against Vanderbilt? I guess I didn't probably realize that. But, yeah, I mean, this is a great athlete. A guy that's been working at defensive back right now. I know that Trey Blunt got some work against Vanderbilt at wide receiver. So a lot of these freshmen are making a big impact. And, Georgia continues to be the kind of program that can say, hey, we play freshmen. Come here, we're going to put you on the field. Come here, we're going to get you involved. That is what we do. And I think that's a good brand for Georgia to have. And I think it's one of those things that helps Georgia with recruiting. Absolutely. Philip Jordan Wells says got to get the pass rush going again. It does seem like it has been absent a little bit lately compared to where it was, certainly going back to the Notre Dame game and, maybe early in the season. That is going to be one of those big things that Georgia's going to have to do. Randy Hall talking about the possibility of a recruiting video coming out, a commitment video. We always love those, no matter who brings them out. Willie Gray Jr. says, what do you think we want for too late in the game for? And do you notice Missouri's offensive line all let me try to get this. Boy, these comments come fast. All roll at the same time after that. So I'm not quite sure what that question is. It kind of moves faster than I can read it sometimes. Ron Winky Thomas says, I hope Kirby channels his inner Spurrier and they beat Florida like they did to us the last time Florida came to Athens. Put the conference on notice. You better believe if Georgia goes out and gets another big 3+ touchdown win, not just the entire conference, but the entire country is going to be in notice at that point in time. Scott Crisler with a good point. He says South Carolina looks like a trap game with Kirby's buddy there. They are a bad team, but always get up for us. So, Scott, I would actually say that I believe that South Carolina is a little better than a bad team right now. Not a great performance against Tennessee, but another win. It's a Carolina team that's probably they have just as much of a claim to kind of like that second tier in the SEC as really anybody else does. I mean, right now, the SEC does not have a lot of clear tiers. You've got, I guess, just two teams at the top, Alabama and Georgia. And then beyond that, kind of a muddled situation beyond that. But whatever that second tier is, I mean, South Carolina looks solidly in it, I believe. I think they're better than bad. Weston Heggie, with all the wood we're chopping, we're going to get 4 good quarters of play from the Dogs. Nice little play on words from him there. James Crump says Fields definitely will not be redshirted if Eason leaves, which seems very possible. Yeah, I don't think Fields is being redshirted no matter what. And by the way, James, I said this to you the other day. I don't know if you heard, but congratulations. I think you won the tickets from Jeff on the big one in Jacksonville giveaway, so congratulations on that one. Slayton Kane, Bernie says Alabama has a big problem with experience. No 4-year starters because of the talent that's there. Talent versus experience. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that Georgia does have is a lot of experienced talent right now with Carter and Bellamy and Dominic Sanders, probably not the same caliber of athlete, but still an experienced player. Obviously, Roquan Smith brings both the athleticism and the experience. Georgia does have good leadership from some of its more talented players. I'm not telling you that makes Georgia better than Alabama, but I believe Georgia's absolutely competitive with Alabama. You know, this notion that somehow Georgia's not competitive yet with the Crimson Tide in an SEC championship game, I don't see that. Alabama would be favored for a reason and probably justifiably receiving the majority of the picks to win the game. But this thought that Alabama is going to somehow whitewash and roll over Georgia, that's not equal to the football that I'm watching every Saturday on really either side, both for Alabama, who I don't think is a perfect team, and Georgia, who I think is better than maybe even with after the credit that Georgia's gotten, Georgia may still be better than some people realize. Adam Hicks says Jim McElwain cooks dry cornbread. Jimmy Barnes on McBride contributing to special teams. Yeah, McBride's been a real special teams demon, I think, for Georgia this season. Travis Ellis says, what's the line for the game? So some of these sports books, I don't know if my bookie has this, but some of these sports books do have the look-ahead lines several weeks in advance. I heard on the radio yesterday that Georgia was a 14-point favorite over Florida. That's just like something I heard on the radio. It may not even be true, but I did hear that. I would guess that the line will actually be smaller than that once you get to the week of the game. We're still very, very early, and any kind of point spread that's out there right now is not going to be you can't make a very big bet on it. It's low limit betting on long range plays. So my guess is when the actual market opens up, it's certainly smaller than 14 points, but I did hear that on the radio. Chris Davis says we need to blitz Franks all day long. He can't handle the pressure of our defense in his face, and I can see at least 3 picks, maybe 1 pick six. Boy, Chris, that'd be a nice thing to see, and certainly a nice thing to enjoy. Chris Martell says, do I think that Texas A&M beats Auburn next? I do think Texas A&M's pretty good. Auburn, boy, I just don't know what to say about them right now. My guess is they'll bounce back against Arkansas on Saturday because I think Arkansas is terrible. But Auburn's a tough team to figure out at the moment. And those of you who are telling me I was wrong about them, you have every right to do that thus far. Diedrich Frazier says he loves it when he hears that UGA has no shot against Alabama. Yeah, that's the kind of motivation you probably want. Joseph Potts on the South Carolina game says for Muschamp is that it'll never be an elite job, but it's too good to jump to another program. He's stuck there until things get bad enough to get fired. I will say that I have a lot of friends who are high school coaches, and that's the one thing they'll tell each other sometimes is, don't go to a place where you are going to get stuck. The kind of place where, you sort of get lost in the shuffle and you don't get a chance to ever win enough to actually move on to the bigger job. And yet, there is something to getting stuck at a job. I don't know that Muschamp's stuck at South Carolina, and I actually don't know that South Carolina is such a bad place to be. I mean, I think in the long-term future of the SEC, I'd rather be at a place like South Carolina than Tennessee, believe it or not. I know that seems crazy because Tennessee's got the better history, but what does the history really matter? Do people care about General Neyland now? Do people care about checkerboard end zones now? I mean, this is about access to players, and South Carolina has got just as much access to players as Tennessee does, given the fact that they're both having to come into Georgia to try to find them. And frankly, the state of South Carolina probably has more talent, even though you have to split it with Clemson, or at least fight with Clemson for those players. I'm not so sure that South Carolina has a worse job than Tennessee going forward. Jason Lambert says, I mentioned this last week, BA, about how sometimes Georgia is in the past has lost teams they shouldn't. During the first half, I was a little nervous against the Missouri, I think he's talking about, but I have seen a change. The difference was they got hit in the mouth, and they hit back. Kirby Smart is changing the culture, and the roster's buying in, and I'm seeing proof of it. Proud Dog fan right here. Jason, I think that's incredibly well said. I think in a lot of ways that's completely true. This team is approaching right now with a mindset that it's a lot less susceptible to stubbing its toe against a Missouri. Doesn't mean that Georgia won't lose a game at some point this season. I mean, it's hard for anyone to run the table and go undefeated. But this team has the kind of mindset that makes that kind of stuff more possible. It is competitively getting up for the big games, and it's staying focused on the games that don't seem quite as big. I'm just like you. I love the mentality that Kirby Smart seems to have this team playing with right now, and I look forward to talking to you more about it at DawgNation Daily, and of course, over the course of the next few days. Thanks for being here with us today. We'll look forward to speaking to you at 3 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon on the SEC Country Facebook page for AT&T SEC Country Live. If you missed a portion of our broadcast, you can hit me up when the show is posted at DawgNation.com or on iTunes, SoundCloud. We'll try to make it available for you there as a podcast, and then again at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live. Y'all have a great day.